Chijioke was a respected businessman and a widower. His late wife Nneka had been the love of his life, and when she passed away, his world crumbled. But for the sake of their daughter Amarachi, he had to move on. After years of loneliness, Chijioke decided to remarry. He met Ifeoma, a beautiful and charming woman who seemed to be the perfect mother figure for Amarachi. She came from a reputable family, and her gentle demeanor convinced everyone, including Chijioke, that she would love his daughter as her own. On the surface, Ifeoma played the role of a caring stepmother well. She showered Amarachi with affection whenever Chijioke was around, ensuring she appeared like the perfect mother, but deep inside, she despised the girl. Amarachi was a constant reminder that Chijioke had loved another woman before her. Every time she looked at Amarachi, she saw Nneka's face, and it filled her with resentment. Despite her hidden hatred, Ifeoma knew she had to be patient. She smiled at Amarachi, but her heart boiled with jealousy. She pretended to care, but in reality, she was waiting for the day when she could fully take control of the household. Let her father die first, then I will show her who truly owns this home. A year after her marriage to Chijioke, Ifeoma gave birth to a daughter, Adamma, and 2 years later she had a son, Ebuka. With the birth of her own children, her resentment towards Amarachi deepened. She began treating the two girls differently, though subtly enough that Chijioke would not notice. Adamma got new clothes. Amarachi got old ones. Adamma ate the finest meals, while Amarachi was given the leftovers. Ifeoma would whisper to her biological children, ensuring they looked down on their stepsister. Yet, Chijioke was observant. He noticed Amarachi's sadness, her hesitation when asking for things, and the way she always seemed to be in the background. He knew Ifeoma wasn't openly cruel, but he could sense something was wrong. One evening, he called his wife aside. Ifeoma, why does Amarachi always seem withdrawn? He asked, watching her reaction closely. What are you saying, my love? Ifeoma feigned innocence. I treat her just like my own children. Chijioke wanted to believe her. He wanted to trust that Ifeoma truly cared for Amarachi, so he reassured himself that maybe it was just his imagination. But deep inside, Amarachi felt the difference. She knew she was not truly loved. Chijioke made it a point to protect Amarachi. Despite his wife's quiet manipulations, he ensured his daughter received the same education as her stepsister. Both girls attended a prestigious private school, wearing identical uniforms. Ifeoma hated this, but she couldn't openly oppose Chijioke's decision. To compensate for her frustration, she found other ways to belittle Amarachi. At home, she made Amarachi do all the chores, while Adamma and Ebuka played. If she made a mistake, she was harshly punished. Ifeoma knew how to keep her cruelty hidden, only displaying her affectionate stepmother act when Chijioke was around. One day, Amarachi returned from school with a top student award. Excitedly, she ran to Ifeoma, hoping for praise. Mother, look, I won a prize today, she beamed. Ifeoma barely glanced at the certificate. Is that why you're shouting? Adamma is also smart, but do you see her making noise? Amarachi's joy deflated. She realized no matter what she did, Ifeoma would never be proud of her. Later that night, Chijioke praised Amarachi for her achievements and promised her a special gift. Ifeoma, watching from the corner, gritted her teeth in silent rage. I will not let this girl take anything from my children, she vowed. Life continued this way for years, Chijioke unknowingly acting as a shield for Amarachi while Ifeoma secretly harbored her hatred. But then, tragedy struck. Chijioke fell suddenly ill. Despite being rushed to the hospital, his condition worsened. The doctors diagnosed him with a heart condition that required surgery, but it was too late. One fateful evening, Chijioke took his last breath, leaving Amarachi at the mercy of her stepmother. During the funeral, Ifeoma put on a show of grief, crying the loudest and ensuring everyone saw her as the devoted widow. But inside, she was relieved. Finally, the only obstacle standing between her and complete control was gone. At the burial, Amarachi clung to her father's coffin, sobbing uncontrollably. He had been her protector, her only source of comfort in a home where she was unwanted. Ifeoma gently pulled her away in front of the mourners, whispering, "Save your tears, girl. Your suffering is only beginning." Amarachi felt a chill run down her spine. Barely a week after Chijoke's burial, Ifeoma wasted no time showing her true colors. The first thing she did was transfer Amarachi to a local public school while keeping Adamma and Ebuka in their prestigious private school. When Amarachi protested, Ifeoma sneered, "Are you paying your school fees? There is no money, so be grateful I'm even sending you to school at all." But it was a lie. Ifeoma had more than enough money. She simply refused to waste it on a child that wasn't hers. The new school was a sharp contrast. From the one Amarachi had known, the buildings were in poor condition, the teachers overwhelmed, and the students rough. She was mocked for speaking proper English, for dressing differently, and for being an outsider. At home, her suffering continued. Ifeoma assigned all the household chores to her, treating her like a maid. Adamma and Ebuka mocked her constantly, encouraged by their mother. Yet Amarachi endured it all. She had no choice. One night, as she lay on her old mattress in the small storage room she had been moved to, she whispered a silent prayer. "God, if my father could see me now, he would cry, but I will survive. I will not let them break me." Little did she know, her time was coming. Amarachi's life had taken a drastic turn. The prestigious school where she once studied alongside Adamma now felt like a distant memory. The new public school was a harsh environment, filled with students from struggling backgrounds. The teachers were overworked and lacked the patience to give individual attention. From the moment she stepped into her new classroom, Amarachi felt like an outsider. She was mocked for her polished English, her neat handwriting, and the fact that she had once attended a better school. "Madam London returnee, what are you doing here?" one of the boys jeered. Abi she failed and was chased away, another laughed. She ignored them and focused on her studies. She refused to let Ifeoma's wickedness destroy her future. At home, the torment continued. While Adamma and Ebuka lived comfortably, Amarachi was treated like a housemaid. She cooked, cleaned, and did all the house chores, while her stepmother and step-siblings enjoyed their privileged lives. Whenever she was exhausted, Ifeoma would sneer, "Your father is gone, no one will pamper you anymore." But despite the suffering, Amarachi remained determined. She knew she had to survive. As the years passed, the differences between Amarachi and Adamma became more pronounced. Adamma lived the life of a princess, expensive clothes, the best education, and no responsibilities. If she needed money, Ifeoma gave it to her without hesitation. Amarachi, on the other hand, had to struggle for everything. Even the smallest request was met with insults. When she needed new books, Ifeoma would scoff, "Do I look like a bank? Use your old ones." When Adamma turned 18, Ifeoma threw a lavish birthday party for her. There was plenty to eat and drink, and all of Adamma's friends attended in their best attire. But when it was Amarachi's birthday, there was no party, no celebration, nothing. She sat alone in her room that night, thinking about her father. If he had been alive, things would have been different. One day, things will change, she whispered to herself. One day. When Amarachi turned 23, suitors began to show interest in her. One evening, a young man named Choka came to their house to express his intentions. He was a polite and hardworking man from a decent family, though not wealthy. He had a stable job and a bright future. When Ifeoma heard Choka had come for Amarachi, her heart burned with anger. Why would any man choose that girl over my daughter? She fumed privately. That night, after Amarachi had gone to bed, Ifeoma called Adamma into her room. That man, Choka, he is a good one. You will be the one to marry him, not Amarachi. But Mama, he came for Amarachi. And so, do you think she deserves him more than you? Tomorrow I will handle it, she said. The next day, when Choka returned to see Amarachi, Ifeoma intercepted him. Young man, she said sweetly, I have thought about your proposal, and while Amarachi is not ready for marriage, my other daughter Adamma is very much available. Choka was shocked. But Ma, I am interested in Amarachi. Ifeoma's smile turned cold. Then you are not interested in marrying from this family. Defeated and humiliated, Choka left, never to return. That evening, Ifeoma looked at Amarachi and sneered, You are not worthy of a good man. Amarachi cried herself to sleep that night. Why does she hate me this much? She wondered. More suitors came for Amarachi, but Ifeoma chased them all away, always redirecting them to Adamma. Then one day, two men came. The first man, Emeka, came dressed simply. He was quiet, respectful, and didn't boast about his wealth. The second man, Desmond, arrived in an expensive car, wearing designer clothes, and immediately impressed Ifeoma. When Emeka asked for Amarachi's hand in marriage, Ifeoma laughed in his face. Look at you, you have nothing to offer my daughter. But when Desmond expressed interest in Adamma, Ifeoma was overjoyed. My daughter, this is the one. Look at his fine car. You must marry him. Without hesitation, she quickly gave Adamma to Desmond and ignored Emeka. She didn't even ask about his background. In her eyes, his wealth was all that mattered. Amarachi, however, saw something different. She had spoken to Emeka and realized he was a genuine, kind-hearted man. When he left that day, she felt a deep sadness, as if an opportunity had slipped away. But fate had other plans. The traditional marriage ceremony for Adamma and Desmond was held in grand style. Ifeoma beamed with pride, walking around, telling everyone, My daughter has married a very rich man. Then, just as the ceremony was about to end, a convoy of luxurious cars arrived. Everyone turned to see Emeka step out, dressed in the finest attire, followed by several wealthy men. Gasps filled the air. Who is this? Ifeoma asked in confusion. Desmond turned pale and immediately went to kneel before Emeka. Oga, please forgive me, Desmond pleaded. At that moment, it was revealed that Emeka was actually a multimillionaire, a businessman who had mentored and employed Desmond. The same Emeka that Ifeoma had mocked and rejected for being poor was now revealed to be the true man of wealth. The whispers in the crowd grew louder. So the woman gave her daughter to a servant while chasing away the master. Greed has finally punished her. Ifeoma stood frozen, her face burning with shame. She wished she could turn back time, but it was too late. As Emeka walked towards Amarachi, he smiled warmly. Amarachi, I came for you before, but your stepmother turned me away. But now I am back. Will you be my wife? Tears filled Amarachi's eyes. For the first time in years, she felt seen, loved, and valued. And as Ifeoma watched in horror, she realized that all her manipulations and greed had only brought her disgrace. The hands of time had turned, and justice had been served. Amarachi had never imagined a wedding like this. It was a dream come true, a culmination of years of suffering, loneliness, and rejection. Emeka's wealth and status had made the event a spectacular affair, everything she had once dreamed of. but never thought possible. The ceremony was held at a luxurious hall with dozens of guests, most of whom had once looked down on her or treated her as invisible. The dresses, the music, the food, and the grandiose decorations were all beyond what she could have ever imagined. Emeka had spared no expense, and Amarachi felt like a queen. Her stepmother Ifeoma was invited, though she would rather have stayed away. The shame of seeing her former stepdaughter marry into wealth after all her manipulations was almost unbearable. She sat at the back of the hall, her eyes constantly glancing at the beautiful bride and the luxury around her. I was blind, Ifeoma whispered to herself. I rejected a good man for my own greed. But no matter how much she regretted her actions, it was too late. Amarachi, now Emeka's wife, had been given everything she deserved, and Ifeoma was left with only her bitter thoughts and the consequences of her own pride. The wedding ceremony was a blessed union, and when it ended, everyone spoke highly of the couple's love. Amarachi deserves all this happiness, people murmured. She worked hard, even when others scorned her. Ifeoma's life after the wedding was a stark contrast to the affluence and joy surrounding Amarachi. She continued to live in her comfortable home, but her heart was heavy with the bitter realization that she had lost the opportunity to elevate her family. She had sacrificed Amarachi for her own selfish desires, pushing her stepdaughter away for the promise of a wealthy son-in-law who turned out to be a servant to the very man she had rejected. Her own daughter Adamma had once been so proud of her supposed victory, but now that Desmond's true financial standing was revealed, she couldn't help but feel embarrassed. Desmond had served Emeka, and his current financial struggles were becoming apparent. Adamma's marriage had become a source of mockery, and it crushed Ifeoma's spirit. Ifeoma could no longer hold her head high in the community. She had sacrificed the well-being of a good man for her own material gain, and now she had lost everything. She tried to ignore the whispers behind her back. Her pride had led her to destroy her own future and the future of her daughter. As Amarachi settled into her new life, she remained grateful and humble, but she couldn't help but feel the distance that had grown between her and her half-sister. Adamma, who had once been close to her, now kept her distance. Her jealousy simmered beneath the surface. Although she outwardly congratulated Amarachi on her wedding, there was an edge to her words. You're lucky, Amarachi. You didn't have to struggle like I did. Amarachi, though hurt, tried to keep her distance. She had no reason to be bitter anymore. She had worked hard for what she had, and she would not let anyone drag her back into the mire of resentment. Meanwhile, Desmond had become a shadow of his former self. His money troubles deepened, and he was no longer the man of wealth that Ifeoma had envisioned for her daughter. The two sisters, once close, had become strangers. Adamma, now trapped in a dysfunctional marriage, spent her days trying to keep up appearances, while Amarachi, in contrast, was flourishing in a loving, prosperous marriage. But the most painful truth was that Adamma's bitterness had only deepened. She resented Amarachi's happiness, and her jealousy became a dangerous emotion, eating away at her sense of self-worth. Desmond had worked for Emeka for several years, but the sudden shift in his financial situation began to affect his marriage. The man he had once served so faithfully now had an immense fortune, while Desmond's own business ventures had failed miserably. Ifeoma, who had been so eager to marry her daughter to what she thought was a wealthy man, began to see the cracks in the illusion. You don't have anything to offer me anymore, Adamma snapped one evening. Desmond, who had tried to hold his head up for so long, could no longer ignore the growing tension in his home. The financial strain on the marriage was too much for Adamma to bear. She had once believed she had married a wealthy man, but now she was living in constant embarrassment and she took it out on him. One day, Adamma gave Desmond an ultimatum: fix this or I will leave you. I didn't marry you to suffer. But Desmond was at a loss. His pride and his failure were his burdens to bear. He could no longer pretend that everything was fine. The man who had once seemed like a catch had become a shadow of the man he used to be. Amarachi, meanwhile, had settled into her marriage with Emeka. Their bond was deepening, and the love they shared was evident to all who knew them. Emeka was the man she had always hoped for, the one who saw her for who she truly was, not just as a beautiful woman, but as a woman with dreams, ambitions, and strength. One evening, as they sat together, Emeka turned to her and said, I never imagined I would find someone as genuine as you. You've shown me that love is not about wealth or status, but about understanding and trust. Amarachi smiled, feeling truly seen for the first time in her life. I never thought I would find this kind of happiness, Emeka. I thought I was destined to suffer. Their relationship was grounded in respect, understanding, and love. Unlike her stepmother, who had tried to manipulate everything around her for material gain, Amarachi had found happiness in what mattered most: love, integrity, and the joy of being valued for who she was. But even as Amarachi embraced her new life, she knew that the hands of time had not stopped turning. The price for Ifeoma's manipulation and greed was steep. Ifeoma's life had become a tangled web of regrets. Her actions, motivated by greed and a desire for material gain, had led to nothing but loss. Her daughter's marriage was crumbling. Her own life felt hollow, and she could no longer ignore the stark truth. She had lost her chance at true happiness by pushing Amarachi aside. The reality hit her hardest when she received an invitation to Emeka and Amarachi's anniversary party. The invitation was polite, but it was a reminder of everything she had lost. Not just her stepdaughter's respect, but also her place in the world that had moved on without her. Emeka and Amarachi's success and happiness were a painful reminder of how wrong she had been. Ifeoma's attempt to keep up appearances and maintain her pride had begun to crack. The whispers in her community were no longer kind, and people no longer treated her with the same respect they once had. It was clear that her manipulations had backfired, and the consequences of her actions were irreversible. She had destroyed relationships she could never rebuild. In the midst of her isolation, she realized one painful truth: her pride had cost her everything. Adamma's marriage to Desmond had always been a fragile illusion. The realization that he was not the wealthy man she had thought him to be had deeply shaken her, but what hurt even more was the growing distance between them. Desmond had become bitter. He no longer saw himself as the man he used to be, and that reflected in his attitude towards her. Adamma's bitterness began to consume her. She could no longer pretend to be happy in a marriage that had turned into a battlefield. She fought with Desmond constantly, blaming him for their misfortune. Every argument ended with her telling him that she had married beneath her and that she deserved better. The strain between them worsened. Desmond withdrew emotionally, and Adamma's bitterness turned into resentment. Her mother, Ifeoma, had made it clear that she had never been good enough for the life she had dreamed of. Adamma's growing dissatisfaction with her marriage led her to seek solace in material things and superficial connections, but none of it healed the emptiness she felt. She longed for a way out, but she was too proud to admit that her marriage was over. The walls she had built around her own heart became higher, and with every day that passed, she felt more lost. It was inevitable. The confrontation between Ifeoma and Amarachi had been brewing beneath the surface for years. And now, With the tension between the two women thick as ever, the moment finally arrived. Amarachi had grown into a confident, successful woman, someone whom Ifeoma could no longer manipulate or control. Ifeoma, with all her pride, finally broke down during a visit to Amarachi's house. In a rare moment of honesty, Ifeoma tried to explain herself. She admitted to her mistakes, but only after years of hurting Amarachi and others. I did what I thought was best. I believed I was doing everything for Adamma's future. I was selfish, and now I see I have lost it all. Amarachi, who had once looked up to Ifeoma as a mother, felt a mix of emotions. Anger, pain, and a deep sense of disappointment flooded her. You betrayed me, Mama. You tore apart what could have been a family. You sacrificed me for your own gain. And look where it's gotten me. The words stung, but they were the truth. Ifeoma's attempt to justify her actions fell flat. Amarachi's tone was calm, but it carried a weight that Ifeoma had never been able to shake off. You thought I was beneath you, didn't you? That I would never be good enough. But look at me now. I am happy, I am loved, and I have everything I need. And you lost it all because of your pride. For the first time, Ifeoma truly felt the weight of her mistakes. The confrontation was not just a clash of two women, it was the breaking of a cycle that had haunted her for too long. It was only a matter of time before Adamma came to terms with her situation. The conflict in her marriage had reached its breaking point. She couldn't keep lying to herself or pretending that Desmond was the cause of all her misery. One evening, after a particularly heated argument with her husband, Adamma went for a long walk by herself. Her mind was clouded with frustration, but in that moment of quiet, something clicked. She had been so focused on what she thought she deserved that she had forgotten what truly mattered, her own happiness and self-worth. Adamma knew she could no longer blame Desmond for her unhappiness. Her own choices had led her down this path. The bitterness she had felt for so long started to give way to sorrow, and for the first time she questioned the life she had built for herself. She knew she needed to make a change, but she didn't know where to start. Adamma realized that she had spent so many years looking outward for validation, but now it was time to look inward and find peace within herself. Ifeoma's life took a turn for the worse. The combination of her guilt, isolation, and regret led her into a deep depression. Her reputation had been tarnished, and she could no longer face the community that had once admired her. She had pushed everyone away, including the daughter she had tried so hard to control. As if fate had conspired against her, Ifeoma's health began to deteriorate. Her heart, weighed down by the burden of guilt, grew weaker each day. She had no one left to care for her, and the emptiness that had consumed her life finally caught up with her. As Ifeoma lay in her bed, her thoughts were of the daughter she had mistreated and the family she had pushed away. With Amarachi and her husband's help, Ifeoma was able to get the necessary medical care. Ifeoma sought her stepdaughter's forgiveness, humbly and with a deep sense of regret for the pain and hurt she had caused in the past. To her surprise, her stepdaughter Amarachi had graciously offered it. As time marched relentlessly forward, Amarachi cared for her, but even as she basked in the warmth of their reunion, she couldn't shake off the lingering guilt that had haunted her for so long. Perhaps one day she would find a way to forgive herself too. Amarachi and Adamma, though broken by their mother's actions, had found their path to peace. They had come to terms with their past, understanding that forgiveness was not about excusing wrongs, but about letting go of the pain. In the end, the lesson was clear. True happiness is not found in wealth, power, or manipulation, but in genuine love, humility, and respect. We should learn to treat people right, as no one knows the head that will wear the crown.